Hi, I'm Vanessa, and 2 years ago my sister stole my fiancé right at our engagement party while my family just watched silently. They pretended not to see how she betrayed me, smiled for photos, and toasted their future. But they didn't know. I secretly owned his entire company. Where are you listening from right now? Morning coffee? Late night scrolling? Drop a comment below because this story of betrayal, silent revenge, and financial justice is going to stay with you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The invitation was glossy white with silver embossing, announcing our engagement celebration at the Harrington Hotel's grand ballroom. 6 months of planning culminated in this perfect evening, a night that was supposed to be about Mason and me. I traced my fingers over our names printed in elegant script, remembering how we'd chosen everything together. The venue, the menu, the music, all carefully selected to reflect our journey. Eliza was beside me in the bridal suite, her bridesmaid. Dress a soft champagne color that complemented her golden brown hair. My sister, always the more striking one, the one who turned heads when we entered rooms together. But that night, I felt beautiful. My ivory dress flowed around me like water, and Mason's eyes had widened when he first saw me earlier that day during our pre-event photos. "You look incredible," Eliza said, adjusting my necklace, a family heirloom our grandmother had left specifically to me. "Mason won't be able to take his eyes off you." I smiled, not seeing the calculation behind her eyes, the way she assessed every detail of my appearance. "Thanks, Liz. I can't believe this is finally happening." Chloe, my best friend since college, entered with champagne flutes balanced precariously between her fingers. "Drinks for the bride-to-be and her gorgeous sister," she announced, her voice light with excitement. We clinked glasses, and I savored the moment, completely unaware that in 3 hours, my world would splinter into unrecognizable pieces. The ballroom was transformed into a dream of white flowers and silver accents, candles flickering in crystal holders along tables draped in silk. Parents, cousins, colleagues, friends, nearly 200 people gathered to celebrate our love story. A story that had begun 4 years earlier at a charity auction where Mason had outbid everyone for a dinner package I'd put together for my nonprofit organization. My father approached as I greeted guests near the entrance. "Princess," he said, kissing my cheek. "Your mother and I are so proud." But there was something in his expression, a tightness around his eyes that I couldn't interpret. I brushed it away as pre-speech anxiety. He would be toasting us later, and public speaking had never been his favorite activity. Mason found me near the champagne fountain, slipped his arm around my waist, and pressed his lips to my temple. "Having fun, future Mrs. Reynolds?" he whispered. I leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against my shoulder. "Everything is perfect," I replied. If I had been more observant, I might have noticed how his eyes drifted over my shoulder, scanning the room. I might have caught the slight stiffening of his posture when Eliza approached in her champagne-colored dress that somehow looked more bridal than bridesmaid on her tall, willowy frame. "Mason. There you are," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Mom was just asking about the property in Aspen. Is it still available for their anniversary trip?" Mason's arm loosened around my waist. "Of course. I'll talk to her about it." I didn't think anything of it then. Mason's family owned several vacation properties, and my parents had been planning their 30th anniversary celebration. It seemed natural they would discuss it. The evening progressed like a beautifully choreographed dance. Dinner was served, wine flowed, and laughter rippled through the ballroom. After the main course, my father stood, tapping his glass with a silver spoon, and the room hushed in anticipation. "When Vanessa was a little girl," he began, his voice warm with nostalgia, "she used to tell us she would marry a prince." Gentle laughter swept through the crowd. I felt my cheeks flush as Mason squeezed my hand under the table. "While Mason might not have a royal title," my father continued, "he has certainly treated our daughter like a princess. Their love story is one of those rare matches that seems destined by something greater than chance." As he spoke, I noticed a strange exchange between my mother and Eliza across the table. A look passed between them, something loaded with meaning that I couldn't decipher. My mother's smile seemed strained, her eyes flicking between Eliza and Mason with an unsettling frequency. After the toast, as guests mingled and the band played softly in the background, I excused myself to freshen up. The restroom was tucked away down a quiet corridor, offering a moment of solitude from the whirlwind of celebration. I stood before the mirror, adjusting a loose strand of hair, when I heard voices from the small alcove beyond the powder room. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Tonight? You want to do this tonight?" It was Mason's voice, hushed but clearly agitated. "Why wait? It's perfect timing. Everyone's here. My sister's voice, confident and persuasive. I froze, lipstick halfway to my mouth, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. What about Vanessa? This will destroy her. There was hesitation in Mason's tone, but not the outright refusal I desperately wanted to hear. She'll survive. She always does. Besides, it's not like she really knows you. Not like I do. The lipstick slipped from my fingers, clattering against the marble countertop. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to the sound of their voices. And the cold realization washing over me like ice water. We've been planning this for months, Mason. Don't lose your nerve now. Months. The word echoed in my mind. While I'd been planning our wedding, choosing flowers and table settings, they had been planning this. Whatever this was. I should have confronted them. I should have walked around that corner and demanded answers. But shock held me immobile, my body refusing to cooperate with the racing thoughts in my mind. Their voices faded as they moved away, leaving me alone with the devastating knowledge that the two people I trusted most were conspiring behind my back. My hands trembled as I retrieved my fallen lipstick, mechanically completed my touch-up, and forced myself to return to the ballroom. The next hour passed in a surreal haze. I moved through conversations on autopilot, smiled when appropriate, thanked guests for coming while my mind replayed those overheard fragments obsessively. What exactly were they planning? How long had it been going on? Was it possible I had misunderstood? I watched them from across the room, Mason and Eliza, standing closer than siblings-to-be should, their heads bent together in conversation. When they realized I was observing them, they separated casually, but the damage was done. I saw it now, the intimate familiarity, the silent communication passing between them. The moment of revelation came shortly before midnight. Tradition dictated that Mason and I would share a final dance before departing for the night. Guests gathered in a circle around the dance floor, champagne glasses in hand, ready to toast our final moments of the celebration. The band began playing our song, At Last, by Etta James, and I waited near the center of the floor for Mason to join me. But as the introduction faded into the first verse, it wasn't Mason who stepped into the spotlight. It was Eliza, her hand linked with his, her face glowing with triumph and something that looked disturbingly like love. Everyone, Mason called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. Eliza and I have an announcement to make. The champagne glass I was holding slipped from my grasp, shattering on the polished wood floor. No one noticed. All eyes were fixed on the couple in the center of the room, my sister and my fiancé. This isn't how we planned to do this, Mason continued, his eyes barely meeting mine before skittering away guiltily. But sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Eliza stepped forward, her voice ringing with confidence. Mason and I have fallen in love. We didn't mean for it to happen, but you can't fight these things. The gasps and murmurs from the crowd created a dissonant backdrop to the roaring in my ears. I looked around wildly, seeking an ally, someone who would stand up and declare this madness for what it was. My eyes found my parents, standing together near the head table. They weren't surprised. My mother's face was composed, resigned even. My father looked uncomfortable but not shocked. They had known. Perhaps not everything, but enough. And they had said nothing. In that moment, something hardened inside me. A coldness settled in my chest, displacing the searing pain of betrayal. With something quieter but infinitely more dangerous, resolve. Because there was something none of them knew. Something I had kept private, not out of secrecy but because the timing had never seemed right. 6 months ago, I had become the majority shareholder of Reynolds Enterprises. Mason's company, the family business he had inherited from his father, had been struggling financially. When a hostile takeover threatened to dismantle everything his family had built, I had stepped in anonymously through my investment firm, Vanessa Carter Investments, to save it. Mason knew his company had been rescued by an anonymous investor. What he didn't know was that the investor was me. I had planned to reveal it after our wedding, to surprise him with the news that I had protected his legacy. Now, as I stood watching, my sister and fiancé announced their betrayal to our friends and family, that information transformed from a loving gift into a powerful weapon. I moved forward, my movements fluid despite the trembling in my limbs. The crowd parted before me. Expressions of pity and shock following my progress toward the couple who had just demolished my future. Congratulations, I said, my voice steady and clear. I hope you'll be very happy together. Relief washed over Mason's face. He had expected hysterics, tears, a scene. He reached for my hand. Vanessa, I'm so sorry. We never meant, I withdrew my hand before he could touch me. I just have one question, Mason. Have you told Eliza about the company? About how close you came to losing everything? Confusion flickered across his features. That's not This isn't the time, because I think she should know exactly what she's getting into. I turned to Eliza, whose triumphant smile had faltered slightly. Did he tell you about the investor who saved Reynolds Enterprises from bankruptcy 6 months ago? The one who now owns 51% of the company? Eliza's eyes darted to Mason. What is she talking about? I reached into my clutch and withdrew a business card, offering it to my sister with a smile that felt foreign on my face. Vanessa Carter Investments. I'm the majority shareholder of Reynolds Enterprises. Have been for half a year now. The blood drained from Mason's face as understanding dawned. You? It was you all along? Me, I confirmed, turning to address our stunned audience. I purchased controlling interest in Reynolds Enterprises last December. Which means I'm not just Mason's ex-fiancé. I'm his boss. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke. The magnitude of what I had just revealed hung in the air like suspended glass, beautiful and dangerous. Then my father stepped forward, his face ashen. Vanessa, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Why? I asked, genuine curiosity in my tone. They didn't feel the need for privacy when betraying me. Why should I extend a courtesy they didn't believe I deserved? My mother's hand clutched at her throat, fingers worrying the pearl necklace she always wore when nervous. Darling, please, please what, Mom? Please don't make a scene? Please pretend this isn't happening? Is that what you did? Pretend you didn't see your youngest daughter and future son-in-law sneaking around behind my back? The hurt that flashed across her face should have satisfied me, but it didn't. Nothing could fill the hollow space that had opened inside me where trust and love had once resided. Eliza recovered first, her shock transforming into anger. This doesn't change anything. Mason and I are still together. You can't separate us just because you control his company. I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. I don't want to separate you. By all means, stay together. Build your life on the foundation of betrayal you've so carefully constructed. I just wanted you both to understand exactly what that life will entail. I turned to face Mason directly, dropping all pretense of civility. Starting Monday, there will be a full audit of all company finances. Every decision you've made in the past 5 years will be reviewed by the board, which, incidentally, I now control. Your executive privileges are suspended pending that review. The color that had drained from his face now returned with a vengeance, angry red splotches marking his cheeks. You can't do that. The company is my birthright. My family, your family signed over controlling interest when they accepted my investment, I interrupted calmly. The documentation is quite clear. Perhaps you should have read it more carefully before accepting the money that saved you from financial ruin. People were beginning to whisper now, the shock wearing off. Enough for the gossip to begin. Phones appeared in hands, no doubt recording the spectacular implosion of what had been, until 30 minutes ago, the society event of the season. I turned back to address our guests, summoning a composure I didn't feel. I apologize for the unexpected turn of events this evening. Please enjoy the rest of the celebration. The bar will remain open for another hour, courtesy of Vanessa Carter Investments. With that final twist of the knife, I walked out of the ballroom, head high, back straight. No one followed me. Not my parents, not my friends. They remained behind, witnesses to the aftermath of my controlled demolition. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. I slipped off my heels, feeling the smooth pavement beneath my bare feet as I walked to the valet stand. The attendant's eyes widened slightly as he took in my disheveled appearance, the carefully styled hair now coming loose, the mascara I could feel smudging beneath my eyes. Are you all right, ma'am? He asked, genuine concern in his young face. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. As I drove away from the Harrington Hotel, from the ruins of what should have been the happiest night of my life, I didn't cry. There would be time for tears later, in the privacy of the home I had built for myself. For now, I needed clarity, focus, and the cold comfort of knowing that while they had taken my heart, I had taken something arguably more valuable, control. My phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat, calls from my parents, from Chloe, from cousins and friends eager for explanations or offering sympathy. I ignored them all. There was only one call I answered, from Patricia Winters, the head of my legal team. I saw your text, she said without preamble when I connected the call through my car's Bluetooth. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, I replied, my voice steadier than I had any right to expect. I want the full audit to begin Monday morning. Every account, every decision, every penny. Vanessa, Patricia's voice softened slightly. I know this is personal, but it's business, I interrupted. It's always been business. The personal part ended tonight. After hanging up, I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring through the windshield as I processed what had happened and what would come next. Eventually, I found myself parked outside my investment firm's office building, the logo. I had designed myself illuminated against the night sky, a phoenix rising from stylized flames. How appropriate, I thought as I stared up at it. From these ashes, I would rise again. Different, perhaps. Harder, certainly. But unbroken. I spent that night at my office, sleeping fitfully on the leather sofa in my private suite. When morning came, I stood at the window watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and rose, and made a promise to myself: this betrayal would not define me. It would refine me. My assistant arrived at 7, surprise registering on her face when she found me already there, still in my engagement party dress. "Miss Carter?" "I didn't expect, Rachel," I cut her off gently. "I need you to clear my calendar for the day. And I'll need a change of clothes from the emergency wardrobe." To her credit, Rachel asked no questions. Within an hour, I was showered, dressed in a crisp black suit, and seated at my desk reviewing the Reynolds Enterprises acquisition documents. My phone continued to buzz with notifications. A text from Eliza: "We need to talk." Another from my mother: "Please call us. We're worried about you." Most surprising was one from Mason's father, Arthur Reynolds. I had no idea. Neither did he. "Can we meet?" I answered none of them. Instead, I called an emergency meeting with my executive team, outlining what had happened in the most clinical terms possible and what would happen next. Reynolds Enterprises will undergo a complete restructuring, I informed them. Mason Reynolds will be removed as CEO, effective immediately. Arthur Reynolds will remain as chairman emeritus, but with no voting power. "Patricia, I want you to prepare the documentation." Patricia nodded, her expression professional but her eyes filled with an understanding that went beyond business. She had been with me since the beginning, had seen me build this firm from nothing. She knew what this victory had cost me. "And the announcement?" asked Michael, my PR director. "Keep it simple. Vanessa Carter Investments confirms its majority stake in Reynolds Enterprises and announces leadership changes. No mention of personal relationships. This isn't about revenge, it's about responsible business management." But it was about revenge, at least partly. The professional veneer I maintained couldn't completely disguise the satisfaction I felt at taking control of something Mason valued above all else. His company was his identity, his pride. Now it was mine. By afternoon, news of the broken engagement had spread through our social circle. By evening, business publications were reporting on the surprise revelation of Vanessa Carter Investments' controlling interest in Reynolds Enterprises. I avoided all personal calls, focusing entirely on work, on the mechanics of dismantling and rebuilding a company that had been mismanaged for years under Mason's leadership. The audit would reveal just how badly, but my preliminary review suggested incompetence if not outright fraud. It was past midnight when I finally returned to my apartment, a sleek penthouse overlooking the river. I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of whiskey I didn't particularly want but felt the occasion demanded, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched before me, a tapestry of lights against the darkness. Somewhere out there, Mason and Eliza were together, perhaps consoling each other over the unexpected consequences of their betrayal. My parents were likely huddled in their living room, crafting explanations and excuses for their complicity. And I was here, alone but not defeated. I raised my glass to the night sky. "To new beginnings," I whispered. The whiskey burned my throat as I swallowed, a physical reminder that I was still here, still standing despite everything. The pain would come in waves, I knew. Tonight was just the first surge of many. But I would weather this storm, and when it passed, I would emerge stronger for having endured it. My phone rang again, displaying Chloe's name. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Before you ask, I'm fine," I said before she could speak. "Like hell you are," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been trying to reach you all day. I didn't know, Ness. I swear I didn't know about them." "I believe you," I said, and I did. Chloe had been my friend since we were assigned as roommates freshman year of college. She had no talent for deception. "But I'm not ready to talk about it yet." "Okay," she said softly. "But when you are, I'm here. And for what it's worth, what you did tonight was legendary. Terrifying, but legendary." A small smile tugged at my lips. "Thanks, I think." After we hung up, I remained on the balcony, watching the city until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Only then did I allow myself to cry, silent tears falling as I mourned not just the relationship I had lost, but the family I now understood I had never truly had. The morning after my engagement party turned revelation, I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of my penthouse. For a disorienting moment, I forgot everything: the betrayal, the public confrontation, the business maneuver that had transformed me from heartbroken fiancé to corporate executioner overnight. Then reality crashed back, and I lay still, letting the weight of it settle over me like a heavy blanket. My phone showed 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the Bloomberg alert that had just appeared: Reynolds Enterprises stock drops 12% following leadership uncertainty. The market was already responding to the news. I made coffee, strong and black, and carried it to my home office where I opened my laptop to check the morning financial reports. Reynolds Enterprises was the lead business story across multiple platforms, with headlines ranging from factual, major shakeup at Reynolds Enterprises as unknown investor reveals identity, to sensational, jilted bride's revenge, how Vanessa Carter seized control of her ex-fiancé's family empire. A knock at my door interrupted my reading. I considered ignoring it, but the persistent rapping suggested whoever it was wouldn't easily be deterred. Through the peephole, I saw Chloe, holding a paper bag that presumably contained breakfast. "I know you're in there," she called. "Open up or I'll use the emergency key." I sighed and unlocked the door. Chloe swept in, setting the bag on my kitchen counter before turning to assess me with critical eyes. "You look terrible," she announced, pulling out containers of pastries and fruit. "But considering the circumstances, that's actually impressive. I expected worse." "Thanks," I said dryly, accepting the coffee she'd brought despite already having made my own. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," she countered, leaning against the counter. "No one would be. But we can pretend if that helps." That was why I loved Chloe: no unnecessary dramatics, no forced sympathy, just straightforward understanding and the space to process things my own way. "Have you heard from them?" she asked, carefully neutral. "I haven't checked messages from either of them," I admitted. "Or my parents. I'm not ready." She nodded, respecting my decision. "The business move, was that planned before or?" "Before," I said, picking at a blueberry muffin without much appetite. "I bought controlling interest 6 months ago as a surprise for Mason. I was going to tell him after the wedding, as a gift. Ironic, isn't it?" Chloe's expression darkened. That bastard. He had no idea what he was throwing away. Apparently not. I sipped my coffee, finding strange comfort in its bitterness. But he's about to learn. After Chloe left, promising to run interference with our mutual friends, I dressed for the day in what I thought of as my armor: a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, crisp white blouse, and the red-soled heels that always made me feel invincible. Today, I needed that feeling more than ever. My driver, Marcus, was waiting when I emerged from my building. His face betrayed nothing, though I was certain he'd heard about last night's events. The staff at Vanessa Carter Investments were nothing if not discreet. "The office, Miss Carter?" he asked as I slid into the back seat. "No," I replied, making a decision. "Reynolds Enterprises headquarters, please." If Marcus was surprised, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and pulled away from the curb, merging into the morning traffic with practiced ease. During the drive, I finally forced myself to read some of the messages on my phone. I started with business contacts, colleagues expressing their support, then moved to friends, sorting through their concern and outrage on my behalf. I saved the hardest for last: family and Mason. My mother had sent 17 texts, each more desperate than the last, culminating in, "Please, Vanessa. We need to explain. It wasn't what you think." My father's messages were briefer but equally pleading: "Call us, princess. We love you." Eliza had sent only 2, the initial, "We need to talk," followed by, "You won't get away with this. Mason's family will fight back." Mason's messages began with apologies, transitioned to anger when the business implications became clear, and ended with threats: "My lawyers will be in touch. You can't steal my company because you're angry about us." I deleted them all without responding. There would be time for confrontations later, on my terms, not theirs. Reynolds Enterprises occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming tower downtown. As we approached, I could see the company logo, a stylized R in navy blue, emblazoned on the side of the building. Soon that would change, along with everything else. Security recognized me immediately when I entered the lobby. Not as Mason's fiancé, but as the majority shareholder whose picture had been circulated to staff earlier that morning by Patricia's team. "Miss Carter," the guard said with a respectful nod, printing a visitor badge that read "Executive Access." "Is Mr. Reynolds in?" I asked casually, as if inquiring about the weather. The guard's poker face slipped slightly. "Yes, ma'am. He arrived about an hour ago. Shall I announce you?" "No," I said with a small smile. "I'd like to surprise him." The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me time to steel myself for the confrontation ahead. When the doors opened, I stepped into the reception area, where a startled assistant, Mason's longtime secretary, Judith, nearly dropped her coffee mug. Miss Carter. We weren't expecting, Mr. Reynolds is in a meeting with legal and, perfect, I interrupted smoothly. That saves me having to gather them myself. Without waiting for a response, I walked past her desk toward the double doors of Mason's corner office. I could hear raised voices inside, Mason's dominant among them, demanding options, strategies, anything to fight back against what he no doubt viewed as my hostile takeover. I pushed the doors open without knocking. 5 heads turned simultaneously. As I entered, Mason, his father Arthur, their CFO Warren Peters, and 2 men in suits who I recognized as the company's legal counsel. Gentlemen, I greeted them calmly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Mason shot to his feet, face flushed with anger. How dare you show up here? You have no right. I have every right, I corrected him, moving further into the room. As the majority shareholder of Reynolds Enterprises, I have not only the right but the responsibility to ensure the company is being properly managed. Which, based on preliminary reports, it hasn't been for some time. Arthur Reynolds, a dignified man in his 70s who had built the company from the ground up before passing leadership to his son, studied me with weary eyes. Miss Carter. I tried to reach you. I know, I acknowledged. And we will talk, Mr. Reynolds. But not now, and not here. I turned my attention to the lawyers, whose discomfort was palpable. Gentlemen, I believe your services for today will no longer be required. My legal team will be in touch regarding the transition. The older of the two cleared his throat. With all due respect, Ms. Carter, we represent Reynolds Enterprises, not just Mr. Reynolds personally. Precisely. I agreed. And as the controlling interest in Reynolds Enterprises now belongs to Vanessa Carter Investments, your client's interests are aligned with mine. A fact I'm sure you're professional enough to recognize. After a moment's hesitation, they gathered their documents and excused themselves, leaving me alone with Mason, Arthur, and Warren. This is insane, Mason spat once the doors closed. You think you can walk in here and take over because I chose your sister over you? This isn't a game, Vanessa. No, I agreed, my voice ice cold. It's not a game. It's business. And frankly, Mason, you're not very good at it. I withdrew a folder from my briefcase and placed it on the conference table. These are the preliminary findings from our review of the company's financial status. Care to explain why Reynolds Enterprises has lost market share in 3 consecutive quarters? Or why the Alpine Resort development is 18 months behind schedule and 30% over budget? Mason's face reddened further. Those are complex situations that you couldn't possibly understand without what? I challenged. Without your expertise? The same expertise that nearly drove this company into bankruptcy before my investment saved it? I understand perfectly, Mason. You've been using the company as your personal piggy bank while making increasingly poor business decisions. Warren Peters, who had remained silent until now, spoke up cautiously. Miss Carter, while there have been some challenges, I assure you the company's fundamentals remain strong. I fixed him with a steady gaze. Then you won't mind explaining the $4 million discrepancy in the development fund that was flagged by our auditors this morning, Mr. Peters? The blood drained from his face. Beside him, Arthur Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing his features. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Gentlemen, as of 9 o'clock this morning, Mason Reynolds is suspended from his position as CEO of Reynolds Enterprises pending a full investigation. Arthur, given your status as founder, you will remain as chairman emeritus, but without executive authority. Warren, consider yourself on administrative leave until the audit is complete. Mason slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this. Dad, tell her she can't do this. Arthur sighed heavily. She can, son. If she has the majority stake, which I suspect she does or she wouldn't be here, then legally she has the right. But it's our company. Mason protested, desperation creeping into his anger. Our name is on the building. And yet, I replied calmly, you are willing to risk all of it with your mismanagement. The board meeting is scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon, where these changes will be formalized. I suggest you use the time until then to gather your personal belongings. I turned to leave, but Mason's voice, suddenly pleading, stopped me. Vanessa, please. We can work this out. What happened between us, between Eliza and me, it was a mistake. I was confused. If this is about punishing me, there must be another way. I looked back at him, this man I had loved, had planned to spend my life with, and felt nothing but a distant pity. This isn't about punishment, Mason. It's about consequences. Something you should have considered before you decided to announce your relationship with my sister at our engagement party. As I walked out, head high and steps steady, I heard Arthur say quietly to his son, "What have you done, Mason? What have you done?" Back in my car, I allowed myself a moment of triumph. The confrontation had gone exactly as planned, better, even. The discovery of financial irregularities gave me leverage beyond what I'd anticipated. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the personal betrayal that had necessitated it. Marcus caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Where to now, Miss Carter?" I hesitated, then made a decision I'd been avoiding. "My parents' house, please." It was time to face the other architects of my humiliation. The drive to the suburbs where I'd grown up took nearly 40 minutes, giving me time to prepare mentally for the next confrontation. The neighborhood hadn't changed, same manicured lawns, same tasteful homes set back from the street, same sense of established prosperity. My parents' Tudor-style house looked exactly as it always had, right down to my mother's prized roses blooming alongside the front walkway. I instructed Marcus to wait, then made my way to the front door, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I rang the bell rather than using my key, a small but significant act that positioned me as a visitor rather than family. My mother answered, her face lighting with relief when she saw me. "Vanessa. Thank God. We've been so worried." She reached for me, but I stepped back, maintaining my distance. "May I come in?" I asked formally. Hurt flashed across her face, but she nodded and stepped aside. I could hear my father in the kitchen, his voice carrying as he spoke on the phone, still no word from her. "If you hear anything," he broke off as I entered, his eyes widening. "She's here. I have to go." He hung up and crossed the room in 3 quick strides, arms outstretched. I raised a hand to stop him, and he froze, confusion and pain evident in his expression. "Vanessa, sweetheart, don't," I cut him off. "Don't pretend this is a happy reunion." My mother joined him, her hands twisting anxiously. "We know you're upset, and you have every right to be. But if you'd just let us explain." "Explain what?" I asked, my voice deceptively calm. "Explain how you watched my sister seduce my fiancé and said nothing? Explain how you stood by while they humiliated me in front of everyone we know? Or perhaps you'd like to explain why neither of you looks particularly surprised by what happened at the party." They exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicions. They had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. "How long?" I demanded. My father sighed, suddenly looking much older than his 60 years. "We suspected something was happening about 2 months ago. We saw them together at the country club when Mason was supposed to be in Chicago. They didn't see us." "And you didn't think to tell me?" The hurt I'd been suppressing leaked into my voice despite my best efforts. "We thought it was just a passing thing," my mother said weakly. "We confronted Eliza, and she promised it was over. We believed her." "You wanted to believe her," I corrected. "Because it was easier than telling me the truth. Because Eliza has always been your priority." "That's not fair," my father protested. "We love you both equally." I laughed, the sound brittle and harsh. "No, Dad. You don't. You never have. Eliza was always the special one, the one who could do no wrong. Even now, after what she's done, you're protecting her." My mother sank onto the sofa, tears beginning to fall. "We never meant to hurt you. We thought we were doing the right thing by giving them time to end it properly, without causing a scandal." "A scandal," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Because that's what matters most, isn't it? Appearances. Well, congratulations. Instead of a quiet little scandal, you got a public spectacle and a business takeover that will be talked about for years." My father's expression shifted from guilt to alarm. "The business, Mason called this morning, ranting about you taking control of Reynolds Enterprises. Is that true?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I've been the majority shareholder for 6 months. I suspended Mason as CEO this morning pending an investigation into financial irregularities." "My God," he whispered. "You've destroyed him." "He destroyed himself," I corrected sharply. "And he destroyed us. I just happened to be in a position to ensure there were consequences for his actions." My mother looked up, her makeup streaked with tears. "What about Eliza? What will you do to her?" The question revealed so much. Her first concern was for Eliza, not me. "Even now, I won't do anything to Eliza," I said quietly. "She's done enough to herself. She's chosen to build a relationship on betrayal, with a man who's about to lose everything he values. That's its own punishment." I moved toward the door, having said what I came to say. My father called after me, his voice breaking. "Vanessa, please. Don't leave like this. We're still your parents. We still love you." I paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at them, these people who had raised me but had never truly seen me, had never valued me as they valued my sister. "Love without respect isn't love," I told them. "It's just habit." I left them there, surrounded by the comfortable trappings of the life they'd built, a life where appearances mattered more than truth, where their youngest daughter's heart was considered an acceptable sacrifice to preserve their precious social standing. As Marcus drove me back to the city, I felt lighter somehow, as if confronting my parents had released a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. There was one more confrontation to face, Eliza, but that could wait. I had a board meeting to prepare for. The conference room at Reynolds Enterprises was packed when I arrived at 2 o'clock. Board members filled the table, with company executives lining the walls. Mason sat at the far end, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain, tie slightly askew, hair less than perfectly styled. Beside him, Arthur Reynolds looked resigned, while Warren Peters appeared physically ill. Patricia was already there, along with my CFO, Jonathan Myers, and 2 members of my executive team. We had prepared extensively for this meeting, anticipating every possible objection, every attempt to undermine my authority. As I took my seat at the head of the table, Mason's usual place, a hush fell over the room. I placed my portfolio on the polished surface and looked around, meeting each gaze directly. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules for this emergency meeting," I began. "For those who don't know me, I am Vanessa Carter, CEO of Vanessa Carter Investments, and as of 6 months ago, the majority shareholder of Reynolds Enterprises." A murmur ran through the room, quickly silenced when I continued speaking. "I know many of you have questions about the timing and nature of this announcement. Let me be clear, my investment in this company was always intended to be constructive, not disruptive. However, circumstances have changed, and in light of troubling information regarding the company's financial management, I have been forced to take a more active role." For the next hour, Jonathan presented our findings, the declining revenues, the questionable expenses, the projects that hemorrhaged money, while Mason assured the board everything was fine. Patricia outlined the legal implications, making it clear that the voting rights associated with my shares gave me the authority to make immediate leadership changes. When the presentations concluded, I addressed the room again. "In light of these findings, I am formally requesting the board's support for the following actions. First, the immediate suspension of Mason Reynolds as CEO, pending a full investigation. Second, the appointment of an interim leadership team, which I will head, to stabilize the company and address the financial concerns identified in our audit." Mason leapt to his feet. "This is nothing but a vindictive attack. She's using her position to punish me for personal reasons." "Mr. Reynolds," I responded calmly, "the financial irregularities documented in our report predate any personal issues between us. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to act in the best interest of the company and its shareholders, of which I am now the largest." The vote, when it came, was decisive. The board, faced with clear evidence of mismanagement and the legal reality of my controlling interest, had little choice. Mason was suspended, the interim leadership team approved, and a full investigation authorized. As the meeting adjourned, Mason stormed out without a word. Arthur lingered, approaching me with measured steps. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "may I have a moment?" We moved to a small side office, away from curious eyes and ears. Once the door closed, Arthur's professional demeanor faltered. "I don't know whether to thank you or curse you," he admitted. "This company is my life's work. Watching Mason run it into the ground has been painful. But he's still my son." "I understand," I said, and I did. Despite everything, I knew Arthur loved his son, flaws and all. "The company can be saved, Mr. Reynolds. But not with Mason at the helm." He nodded slowly. "And what happens when your investigation is complete? What are your plans for Reynolds Enterprises?" "That depends on what we find," I answered honestly. "But my goal isn't to dismantle what you've built. It's to preserve it, to make it stronger. Just under different leadership." Arthur studied me for a long moment. "You would have been good for him, you know. For the company too. He made a terrible mistake." "Yes," I agreed simply. "He did." As I left the building that had until recently borne Mason's family name, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I had won this battle, but the war to save Reynolds Enterprises, and to rebuild my own life from the ashes of betrayal, was just beginning. The confrontation with Eliza came 3 days after the board meeting, not in some dramatic showdown I might have envisioned, but in the sterile setting of a lawyer's conference room. My sister had requested a meeting through her attorney, a development that surprised me until I learned she was now living in Mason's penthouse and using his legal team. I arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a seat that would put the sunlight at my back and in her eyes. A petty move, perhaps, but I was done with taking the high road. The high road had led me here, to this moment of facing the sister who had betrayed me without a second thought. When she entered, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, confident woman who had stood beside Mason at our engagement party, triumphant in her treachery. This Eliza looked smaller somehow, her designer outfit impeccable but her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Vanessa," she said, her voice carrying a forced steadiness. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I was curious what you could possibly have to say," I replied, not bothering to stand or offer a handshake. "Your legal team mentioned something about a settlement proposal?" Eliza took the seat across from me, placing a slim folder on the table between us. "Yes. We thought it might be best to resolve this situation amicably." Amicably, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. An interesting choice, considering the circumstances. She flinched slightly but pressed on. "The proposal is straightforward. In exchange for returning control of Reynolds Enterprises to Mason, you would receive a substantial financial settlement and certain non-compete assurances." I didn't touch the folder. "And if I refuse?" "Mason is prepared to challenge your acquisition in court. He'll argue that you deliberately concealed your identity as the investor with the intention of taking hostile control of the company. Which would be difficult to prove," I pointed out, "considering I acquired the shares 6 months before I had any idea you two were involved." Eliza shifted uncomfortably. "It doesn't have to get ugly, Vanessa. We can all walk away from this with something." I studied her, this person who shared my blood but had become a stranger to me. "Tell me something, Eliza. Was it worth it? Betraying me for Mason? Because from where I'm sitting, you've traded one thing for another, and I'm not sure you got the better end of the deal." Her perfectly maintained composure cracked just slightly. "I love him," she said, as if those 3 words could justify everything. "You love him," I echoed. "And yet here you are, doing his dirty work, trying to save his company because he can't face me himself." "That's not fair," she protested. "Mason is devastated by what's happening to Reynolds Enterprises. His father is practically catatonic. The company has been in their family for generations." "And yet," I countered, "Mason risked all of it for what? A fling with his fiancé's sister? Poor business decisions? Financial mismanagement? Those aren't my doing, Eliza. Those are his choices, just like you were his choice. And now you're both living with the consequences." Eliza's eyes flashed with a familiar defiance. "This isn't about business for you. It's revenge." "No," I corrected her calmly. "Revenge would be destroying the company out of spite. What I'm doing is saving it from the man who nearly ran it into the ground while convincing everyone, including himself, that he was a brilliant CEO." I pushed back from the table and stood. "You can tell Mason that his settlement offer is rejected. Reynolds Enterprises is not for sale, especially not to him. The investigation will continue, and when it's complete, the board will decide on permanent leadership changes." "Vanessa, please," Eliza said, rising quickly. "At least think about it. For the family's sake." I laughed at that, a short, bitter sound. "Family? You forfeited any right to appeal to family loyalty the moment you decided to pursue my fiancé behind my back. As for our parents, they made their choice when they chose to protect you instead of warning me." I moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "One more thing, Eliza. The audit has uncovered some interesting transactions between Reynolds Enterprises and several shell companies. 3 of them list you as a director. Care to explain that?" The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about." "No? Well, the forensic accountants seem to think you do. They're particularly interested in a series of consulting fees paid to your event planning business over the past 2 years. Fees that total just over $500,000 for services that can't be verified. Those were legitimate business expenses," she insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. "We'll see," I said simply. "The SEC tends to have strong opinions about family members receiving corporate funds without proper documentation or board approval." I left her standing there, the settlement folder unopened on the table. Whatever love stories she and Mason had constructed to justify their betrayal, it was about to collide with the harsh reality of potential legal consequences. The drive back to my office gave me time to process the meeting. I had expected to feel vindicated after confronting Eliza, but instead, I felt oddly empty. There was no satisfaction in watching my sister squirm, no joy in threatening her with legal consequences, however deserved they might be. My assistant greeted me when I arrived, her expression concerned. "Everything okay, Ms. Carter? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine, Rachel," I assured her. "Just tired." "What's on the agenda for the rest of the day?" "The transition team from Reynolds is waiting in the main conference room. They brought the files you requested about the Alpine Resort project. And Ms. Winters called. She says the preliminary forensic accounting report is ready whenever you want to review it." I nodded, gathering my professional demeanor around me like armor. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Alone in my office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The past week had been a whirlwind of business meetings, legal consultations, and strategic planning sessions. I had thrown myself into the work of restructuring Reynolds Enterprises, using the challenge to avoid dealing with the personal aftermath of my shattered engagement. But in quiet moments like this, the pain would surface, not as the sharp, searing agony of fresh betrayal, but as a dull ache of loss. Not for Mason, whose true character had been revealed in the cruelest way possible, but for the future I had imagined, the family I thought I had, the certainties I had built my life around. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Dinner tonight? You need a break." I smiled slightly, grateful for her persistence. 7:30 at Luciana's, I replied. "I'll try not to cancel this time." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of spreadsheets, legal documents, and strategic planning. The Alpine Resort project, once Mason's flagship development, was in worse shape than we'd initially thought. Cost overruns, design changes, and questionable contractor selections had turned what should have been a profitable venture into a financial sinkhole. "If we continue as planned, we're looking at another $60 million before completion," Jonathan explained, pointing to projections that made my stomach clench. "And even then, the return on investment is questionable given the current market. What are our options?" I asked, scanning the documents spread before us. "We could scale back significantly, focus on completing just phase 1 and reassess. Or cut our losses entirely, sell the property as is." I shook my head. Selling now would be admitting defeat. And it would cost jobs, not just the construction crews but the staff who would eventually work there. "It's your call," Jonathan said. "But whatever we decide, we need to move quickly. The project is bleeding cash every day it sits unfinished." By the time I left for dinner with Chloe, I had made my decision. We would restructure the Alpine project, scaling back the more extravagant elements while preserving the core vision. It wouldn't be the monument to excess that Mason had envisioned, but it would be sustainable, profitable, and would preserve the jobs of hundreds of workers. Luciana's was quiet for a Friday night, the soft lighting and intimate table settings creating a cocoon of privacy for its patrons. Chloe was already there when I arrived, a glass of wine in hand and a sympathetic smile on her face. "You look better than I expected," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "Though that's not saying much, considering the week you've had." "Thanks," I said dryly, accepting the glass of Cabernet she'd already ordered for me. "I feel like I've aged a decade in 7 days. Understandable. Not everyone discovers their fiancé's betrayal and takes over a multi-million-dollar company in the same night. Though I have to say, as revenge goes, it's pretty spectacular." I sipped my wine, letting the rich flavor wash over my tongue. It wasn't supposed to be revenge. The acquisition was meant to be a wedding gift. "Life has a sense of humor," Chloe observed. "Dark, but still." We ordered food, pasta for Chloe, salmon for me, and for a while, conversation drifted to safer topics, mutual friends, Chloe's latest photography project, a gallery opening she wanted me to attend. It was only after our plates had been cleared and a second bottle of wine opened that she broached the subject we'd been avoiding. "Have you heard from Mason since the board meeting?" I shook my head. "Not directly. He's letting his lawyers and Eliza do his dirty work." "Coward," she muttered. "And your parents?" "My father calls daily. I let it go to voicemail. My mother sends texts about how they're worried and just want to talk." "I'm not ready." Chloe nodded, understanding. Without judgment. "And how are you, really? Not the business you, not the vengeful ex-fiancé you. Just you." The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on maintaining control of Reynolds Enterprises, of my emotions, of the narrative surrounding the scandal, that I hadn't really allowed myself to feel anything beyond the initial shock and anger. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "Most days I'm too busy to think about it. But sometimes, usually late at night, it hits me. Not just Mason and Eliza, but all of it. The fact that my entire family conspired to keep me in the dark. That they watched me plan a wedding to a man they knew was involved with my sister." Chloe reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You didn't deserve any of it. Not one bit. The worst part is that I still don't understand why," I continued, the wine and the comfort of Chloe's friendship loosening my carefully maintained composure. "Was I such a terrible person that they all felt justified in betraying me? Did they think I wouldn't care? Or did they just think I wouldn't fight back?" "They underestimated you," Chloe said firmly. "They always have. Your parents favored Eliza, Mason took you for granted, and none of them saw the strength you've always had. The strength you're showing now." I smiled weakly. "Is that what this is? Strength?" Because most days it feels like I'm just putting one foot in front of the other, trying not to drown in all of this. That's exactly what strength is, she insisted. Continuing to move forward when everything in you wants to collapse. Building something new from the ruins of what was destroyed. You're doing that, Vanessa. Every day. Her words settled over me, a comforting blanket of truth. I was surviving this. More than surviving, I was reshaping my life on my own terms, refusing to be defined by betrayal or bitterness. Enough about my disaster of a personal life, I said, straightening my shoulders. Tell me more about this gallery opening. Is it the same photographer you were raving about last month? The rest of the evening passed pleasantly, a much-needed respite from the intensity of the past week. By the time we parted ways outside the restaurant, I felt more centered than I had in days, reminded that not everyone in my life had chosen to betray me. Same time next week? Chloe asked, hugging me tightly. Absolutely, I promised. And thank you for everything. She waved off my gratitude. That's what friends are for. Real ones, anyway. The following Monday brought another unexpected confrontation. I was reviewing the latest financial reports from Reynolds Enterprises when Rachel buzzed my intercom. Miss Carter, there's an Arthur Reynolds here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent. I hesitated, weighing the potential benefit of speaking with Mason's father against the emotional cost. Send him in, I decided. Finally. Arthur entered my office with the dignified bearing of a man who had once commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. Age and recent events had taken their toll, however, new lines marked his face, and his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. Thank you for seeing me, Miss Carter, he said, taking the seat I indicated across from my desk. What can I do for you, Mr. Reynolds? I kept my tone professionally neutral, unwilling to reveal any emotion until I understood his purpose. He sighed, folding his hands in his lap. I've come about the Alpine Resort project. I understand you're considering significant changes to the original vision. The original vision was financially unsustainable, I replied. The changes we're implementing will allow the project to be completed within a reasonable budget while still delivering a high-quality resort experience. I see. He nodded slowly. And the Reynolds name? Will that remain? I thought. Now we come to it. We're considering rebranding options, I said carefully. Given recent events and the company's eventual transition to new ownership, a fresh identity seems appropriate. Arthur's face tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. The Reynolds name has been associated with quality and excellence for over 40 years. Whatever my son's failings, and I acknowledge they are significant, the legacy my wife and I built deserves consideration. I studied him, this proud man fighting for the last remnants of his family's heritage. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. Mr. Reynolds, I understand your concern for your family's legacy. But I also have a responsibility to the company's employees, shareholders, and future. The Reynolds name is now inextricably linked to financial mismanagement and a very public scandal. Rebranding isn't just a business decision, it's a necessary step toward rebuilding trust. He absorbed my words in silence, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond my shoulder. Finally, he spoke again. May I ask a personal question, Miss Carter? I nodded cautiously. Is there nothing of value you wish to salvage from the wreckage of these past weeks? Nothing worth preserving despite the pain? The question caught me off guard with its unexpected depth. Arthur wasn't just talking about his company or his family name. He was asking a more fundamental question about forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of building something new from the ashes of betrayal. I'm trying to salvage the company, I said after a moment. To save jobs, to create something sustainable from what your son nearly destroyed. Isn't that enough? Perhaps, he conceded. But business is business. I'm asking about the personal cost. The hatred you must carry for my son, for your sister, for your parents, it's a heavy burden. One I wouldn't wish on anyone, least of all someone as capable and intelligent as you. I leaned back in my chair, considering his words. Are you suggesting I forgive them? Pretend none of this happened? Not at all, Arthur shook his head. What they did was unforgivable, particularly Mason. But carrying anger indefinitely only hurts you in the end. I learned that lesson after my wife died and I discovered her long affair with my former business partner. The revelation stunned me into silence. I had always thought of the Reynolds as the perfect family, successful, united, the epitome of old money and class. Yes, Arthur said, noting my surprise. Appearances can be deceiving. I spent years consumed by bitterness, plotting elaborate revenge that I never enacted. It nearly destroyed me, and it damaged my relationship with Mason irreparably. I don't want to see you make the same mistake. What are you suggesting? I asked, genuinely curious now. Build something new, he said simply. Not just with the company, but with your life. Use this crucible to forge something stronger, something entirely yours. Rename the company not to erase the Reynolds legacy, but to establish the Carter one. His words resonated in a way I hadn't expected. For weeks, I had been focused on dismantling what Mason had built, on exposing his incompetence and forcing him to face consequences. But Arthur was suggesting a different path, not forgiveness, but transcendence. Moving beyond revenge to creation. I'll consider what you've said, I told him, and I meant it. About the company name and the rest. Arthur nodded, apparently satisfied. He rose to leave but paused at the door. One more thing, Miss Carter. Mason doesn't know I'm here, and he would be furious if he did. But for what it's worth, I believe the company is in better hands with you than it ever was with him. Perhaps that's the real tragedy in all of this, that he couldn't see the value of what he had, in business or in love. After he left, I sat motionless at my desk, turning his words over in my mind. Build something new. Establish the Carter legacy. Use this crucible to forge something stronger. It was a different perspective than I had allowed myself to consider, one that looked forward rather than back. Not forgetting the betrayal, but refusing to let it define my future. That evening, as I worked late in my office overlooking the city skyline, I made a decision. I would rename Reynolds Enterprises, but not out of spite or vengeance. I would build something new from the foundation of what Arthur Reynolds had created, something that honored the company's history while charting a bold new course for its future. And perhaps, in time, I would find a way to release the anger that still burned within me, not for them, but for myself. Because Arthur was right about one thing, carrying that burden indefinitely would only limit what I could become. As the city lights blinked on one by one below me, I felt something shift inside, not forgiveness, not yet, but the first tentative steps toward healing. Toward reclaiming not just a company, but my own story. 6 months after the night that had shattered my world and transformed my future, I stood on the observation deck of what had once been the Reynolds Enterprises headquarters. The building now bore a different name, Phoenix Holdings, emblazoned in elegant gold lettering across its facade. The choice had been deliberate, symbolic of a company rising from the ashes of mismanagement and scandal to emerge stronger, more vibrant, and fundamentally changed. Below me, the city stretched out in a tapestry of light and shadow, life continuing its relentless forward motion despite the personal earthquakes that had reshaped my existence. So much had changed in half a year: the company, my relationships, my understanding of myself and what I was capable of surviving. Miss Carter? Rachel's voice came through the intercom on my desk. The board members have arrived for the quarterly meeting. They're gathering in the main conference room. Thank you, Rachel. I'll be right there. I took one last look at the view, straightened my jacket, and headed toward the meeting that would formalize what many already considered a remarkable business turnaround. In 6 months, Phoenix Holdings had not only stabilized but begun to thrive under new leadership. The Alpine Resort project had been reimagined and was now on track for a profitable launch next spring. The financial irregularities that had plagued Reynolds Enterprises had been addressed, with transparent reporting and strengthened oversight systems now in place. The conference room fell silent as I entered. Familiar faces looked back at me, the board members who had voted to remove Mason, now joined by 3 new directors I had personally recruited for their expertise and integrity. Patricia sat near the head of the table, a folder of legal documents before her. Jonathan was reviewing financial projections on his tablet. And seated at the far end was Arthur Reynolds, his position as chairman emeritus preserved out of respect for his legacy, if not his son's. Good morning, I greeted them, taking my place at the head of the table. Thank you all for being here for this important milestone in our company's evolution. The meeting proceeded smoothly, each department head reporting significant progress in their respective areas. The financial results were particularly encouraging, a 16% increase in revenue over the previous quarter, with profitability metrics that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Before we conclude, I said as the final presentation ended, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that has brought us to this point. 6 months ago, this company was on the brink of financial collapse. Today, we stand stronger than ever, with a clear vision for the future and the resources to achieve it. I looked directly at Arthur as I continued. This success honors the foundation that was built over 40 years while embracing the changes necessary for sustainable growth. Phoenix Holdings represents not an erasure of history, but an evolution, preserving what worked while having the courage to transform what didn't. Arthur nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the delicate balance I had struck between respecting the company's origins and asserting its new identity. After the board dispersed, Arthur lingered, approaching Me as I gathered my notes. Impressive results, he said simply. You've accomplished more in 6 months than Mason did in 3 years. Thank you, I replied. Though I can't take all the credit. The team we've assembled has been exceptional. A team you selected and inspired, he pointed out. Leadership matters, Ms. Carter. You've proven that beyond any doubt. I smiled, accepting the compliment with a nod. How is Mason? I asked, surprising myself with the question. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in months, had deliberately avoided news about him or Eliza. Arthur sighed, the lines in his face deepening. Struggling. The SEC investigation into the financial irregularities hit him hard. His legal bills are mounting, and several of his former associates have distanced themselves. As for his relationship with your sister, he hesitated. It's all right, I assured him. You can speak freely. They're still together, but it's strained. The glamour of forbidden romance fades quickly when faced with real-world consequences. I absorbed this information without the surge of satisfaction I might once have expected. There was a time when news of their difficulties would have brought me joy, vindication even. Now I felt only a distant sadness for all that had been lost. And you? Arthur asked. Beyond the professional success, how are you faring? The question was unexpected, personal in a way our interactions had not been since that day in my office when he had spoken of his own experience with betrayal. I'm rebuilding, I said after a moment. Finding my way forward. He nodded. As if he understood completely. The hardest lesson I learned after my wife's betrayal was that healing isn't linear. Some days you feel whole again, and then something triggers the pain anew. But it does get easier. I'm beginning to see that. I admitted. Thank you, Arthur. For your insight then, and now. As he left, I remained in the conference room, reflecting on how far I had come since that devastating night at the Harrington Hotel. The betrayal still hurt when I allowed myself to dwell on it, but the sharp edges had softened, the wound no longer bleeding afresh with every reminder. That evening, I met Chloe for our now regular Friday dinner at Luciana's. She had become my lifeline during the past months, her unwavering support and brutal honesty helping me navigate the treacherous waters of personal and professional transformation. So, she said after we had ordered, big day with the board meeting. How did it go? Better than expected, I admitted. The numbers speak for themselves. Phoenix Holdings is officially a success story. And how does that feel? Vindication? Satisfaction? I considered the question, swirling the wine in my glass. Something else entirely. Pride, maybe. Not because I proved Mason wrong or outperformed him, but because I built something worthwhile. Something that's entirely mine. Chloe smiled. Her eyes warm with understanding. That's growth, my friend. 6 months ago, you would have said revenge was the sweetest part. 6 months ago, I was a different person, I acknowledged. Hurt, angry, focused on making them pay rather than making myself whole. And now? Now I see that success truly is the best revenge, but not in the way I thought. Not because it hurts them, but because it heals me. Our conversation shifted to other topics, Chloe's upcoming photography exhibition, a mutual friend's engagement, plans for the holidays that were rapidly approaching. It was only when dessert arrived that she hesitantly broached a subject we had been avoiding. Your mother called me yesterday, she said, watching my reaction carefully. She wanted to know if you would consider meeting with them. Just them? Not Eliza. I set down my fork, the chocolate soufflé suddenly less appealing. What did you tell her? That I would pass along the message, but the decision was entirely yours. Chloe reached across the table, her expression earnest. And it is, Ness. You don't owe them anything, not after what they did. But if it would help you move forward either by giving you closure or opening a door to a different kind of relationship, then maybe it's worth considering. I had been avoiding this moment, this decision about whether to allow my parents back into my life in any capacity. Part of me still burned with anger at their complicity, their silence, their choice to protect Eliza rather than warn me. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger in recent months, recognized that carrying that anger indefinitely served no purpose except to keep me tethered to the past. I'll think about it, I promised. Not right away, but soon. Chloe nodded, accepting my answer without pushing further. Whatever you decide, I'm here. You know that, right? I do, I smiled, grateful beyond words for her steadfast friendship. And it means more than I can say. The opportunity to test my resolve came sooner than expected. The following Tuesday, as I was leaving a business lunch at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, I nearly collided with my mother in the entranceway. She was dressed impeccably as always, her pearl necklace gleaming against the navy blue of her dress, but her face showed signs of strain that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Vanessa, she gasped, clearly as startled by the encounter as I was. I didn't expect to see you here. Mother, I acknowledged, my voice steadier than the sudden racing of my heart. How are you? We're managing, she said, her eyes searching my face hungrily, as if storing away details to examine later. Your father asks about you all the time. We both do. I nodded, acutely aware of the other diners moving around us, the curious glances from those who recognized us and knew something of the scandal that had torn our family apart. I heard you reached out to Chloe. Yes, she confirmed, twisting her wedding ring nervously. We were hoping, that is, I was hoping we might talk. Just the three of us. 6 months ago, I would have walked away without another word, leaving her standing there with her request unanswered. 6 months ago, the wound was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. But now, standing in this crowded restaurant foyer, I found that the anger that had sustained me for so long had transformed into something quieter, something that left room for other possibilities. Why now? I asked, genuinely curious. It's been 6 months. My mother's composure slipped slightly, revealing a vulnerability I rarely saw in her. Because I miss my daughter, she said simply. Because I made a terrible mistake, and while I can't undo it, I want to try to make amends. If you'll let me. I studied her, this woman who had raised me but had never quite seen me, had never valued me as she valued Eliza. There was sincerity in her eyes now, and something else, a respect that hadn't been there before. Perhaps seeing what I had accomplished. With Phoenix Holdings, how I had transformed from the heartbroken bride-to-be into a formidable business leader, had changed her perception of me. I can't promise anything, I said finally. But yes, we can talk. Not this week, but maybe next. I'll have my assistant contact you to arrange a time. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, Vanessa. That's more than, she caught herself. Thank you. As I continued to my car, I felt lighter somehow, as if agreeing to this meeting had released a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Forgiveness was still a distant possibility, trust even more so, but the door that had seemed permanently closed now stood slightly ajar. That night, alone in my penthouse, I found myself drawn to the balcony where I had stood 6 months earlier, glass of whiskey in hand, toasting new beginnings through tears. The city looked different now, or perhaps I did. The lights no longer seemed to mock me with their brightness, the distant sounds of traffic no longer a painful reminder of lives continuing while mine had been derailed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I hear Phoenix is rising. Well done. A.R. Arthur Reynolds, reaching out with a message of acknowledgement and perhaps something more, respect from someone who had seen the worst of my situation. And the best of my response to it. I typed back simply, thank you. For everything. The next morning brought another unexpected development. As I reviewed the daily news briefing prepared by my PR team, a headline caught my eye: Mason Reynolds accepts plea deal in SEC investigation, agrees to penalties and industry bar. The accompanying article detailed how Mason had admitted to financial improprieties at Reynolds Enterprises, agreeing to pay substantial fines and accept a 5-year ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. In exchange, he would avoid criminal charges that could have resulted in prison time. I read the article twice, waiting for the surge of vindication, the satisfaction of seeing him face consequences for his actions. It came, but muted, tempered by a strange sense of closure. Mason's fall was complete, his reputation damaged beyond repair, his career in shambles, his future fundamentally altered by his own choices. Justice had been served without any further action on my part. The systems I had put in place, the investigations I had initiated, had followed their natural course to this inevitable conclusion. I hadn't needed to pursue personal vengeance, I had simply needed to uncover the truth and let it speak for itself. Later that day, as I was reviewing proposals for Phoenix's next major acquisition, Rachel buzzed my intercom. Miss Carter, there's an Eliza Parker here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent. My sister. Here. Now. I hesitated, weighing the potential benefit of facing her against the emotional cost. 6 months ago, our last encounter had been in a lawyer's office, with threats and accusations flowing between us. What could she possibly want now? Send her in, I decided finally, steeling myself for whatever confrontation might follow. Eliza entered my office with none of her usual confidence. She moved cautiously, almost timidly, taking the seat I indicated. With a murmured, thank you, that seemed foreign coming from her lips. This is unexpected, I said, keeping my tone neutral. What brings you here, Eliza? She looked different, thinner, paler, the designer clothes she still wore somehow not sitting quite right on her frame. I saw the news about Mason, she began. The plea deal. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I wanted you to know that I had nothing to do with the financial irregularities, she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. The consulting fees to my event planning business, they were Mason's idea. He said it was a standard practice, a way to support me while maintaining the appearance of propriety. And you believed him? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my tone. I wanted to, she admitted. I wanted to believe everything he told me, that he loved me, that you two were already having problems, that everyone would understand eventually. I leaned back in my chair, studying this unfamiliar version of my sister, vulnerable, uncertain, possibly even remorseful. Why are you telling me this now? Eliza's gaze dropped to her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. Because I'm leaving him, she said quietly. Because I finally see clearly what I was too blinded by. Whatever I felt for him to recognize before. And what's that? That he used me, she said, looking up with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. That he used both of us. You for your financial acumen and connections, me for other things. And when he was caught, he tried to use me again, to shield himself from the consequences. I absorbed her words in silence, noting the absence of the word love in her description of their relationship. Had she finally recognized that what she had felt for Mason, what she had destroyed our relationship for, wasn't love at all but something more transient, more selfish? I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Eliza continued when I didn't respond. I know what I did is unforgivable. I betrayed you in the worst possible way, and I have to live with that. But I wanted you to know that I see it now, all of it. How wrong I was, how much I hurt you, how I chose a man who never truly valued either of us over the sister who had always been there for me. Her voice broke on the last words, a tear finally escaping to trace a path down her cheek. I watched it fall, feeling strangely detached from the emotion that once would have moved me to either comfort her or lash out in renewed anger. What do you want from me, Eliza? I asked, genuinely curious. Absolution? Understanding? A relationship restored as if nothing happened? She shook her head. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that I recognize the magnitude of what I did. And that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. The apology hung in the air between us, inadequate to heal the breach yet somehow necessary for both of us to move forward. I considered my response carefully, aware that this moment would define our relationship, or lack thereof, for years to come. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. I can't offer forgiveness, not yet. Maybe not ever. But I acknowledge your apology, and I appreciate the courage it took to come here and offer it in person. Relief washed over her face, not because I had forgiven her, but because I had listened, had not dismissed her outright. That's more than I deserve, she said softly. Thank you. As she rose to leave, I found myself asking, what will you do now? Where will you go? Eliza paused, her hand on the back of the chair she had just vacated. I'm moving to Chicago. A fresh start, away from everything. I've applied for a position with an event planning firm there. No family connections, no advantages. Just me and whatever skills I actually possess. I nodded, recognizing the echo of my own journey in her words, the need to prove oneself on merit alone, to build something independent of family expectations or assistance. I wish you well, I said, and meant it. And I you, she replied. Though you don't need my wishes. You've already created something remarkable here. She gestured to the office, the view, the trappings of success I had built from the ruins of betrayal. I always envied that about you, you know. Your ability to see beyond what was to what could be. To build rather than simply inherit or acquire. With that surprisingly insightful parting observation, she left, closing the door softly behind her. I sat motionless at my desk, absorbing the unexpected closure her visit had provided. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of the wrong done, of the price paid, of the separate paths now stretching before us. That evening, as I drove home through the city that had witnessed both my deepest humiliation and my most profound triumph, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. From the shattered bride-to-be standing alone on the dance floor to the CEO who had transformed a failing company into a thriving enterprise. From a woman defined by betrayal to one defined by resilience, vision, and the courage to rebuild from ashes. The future stretched before me, no longer shadowed by the past but illuminated by possibilities I had created for myself. There would be challenges, certainly. The meeting with my parents loomed on the horizon, with its potential for both healing and renewed pain. The continued growth of Phoenix Holdings would demand my best efforts, my clearest thinking, my strongest leadership. But for the first time since that devastating night at the Harrington Hotel, I faced those challenges not with dread or anger but with confidence. I had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and had not merely endured, I had flourished. I had Taking control not just of a company but of my own narrative, refusing to be defined as a victim when I could instead be defined as a creator, a builder, a phoenix rising from the flames. As I pulled into the garage beneath my building, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the same one who had driven away from her engagement party 6 months earlier, tears streaming down her face as she navigated the ruins of her planned future. This woman's eyes held wisdom earned through pain, strength forged in fire, and a quiet certainty that whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. To new beginnings, I whispered to my reflection, echoing the toast I had made on that first terrible night. But this time, there were no tears, no bitterness tainting the words. Only the clear-eyed recognition that sometimes, the end of one story is simply the necessary prelude to the beginning of a better one. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.